Welcome to Atheists Speak Up. I'm your host, Steve Whitty, and with me in the studio is Norm Cohen. He is the Executive Director of NOCIRC of Michigan. Norm, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I understand that what we want to talk about is this court case, and it has to do with female genital mutilation. So let's just dive into it.
Sure. This is the case of Dr. Jamana Nagerwala. She and her co-conspirators were arrested in April of 2017 on charges of female genital mutilation, conspiracy, and sex trafficking as well. There were 6 girls who were mutilated in a clinic in Livonia, Michigan. 2 of these girls were taken from Minnesota by their mothers to visit Michigan for the purposes of female genital cutting. This is the very first time that FGM, female genital mutilation, has been prosecuted in the United States under a law that was signed by Bill Clinton in 1996 and went into effect in 1997. So it's a landmark case for the rights of children to be protected from any genital cutting.
So we'll see from this case, we'll see what the law actually is according to the courts, and how it how it all plays out.
Right. The case has gotten a lot of local media attention as well as national and international attention. A lot of people, for different reasons, are paying a great deal of attention to the case.
Sure.
The defense has already displayed their strategy, and they're going to say this is the religious freedom of the parents to choose in their own religion what they practice on their children, in this case, the female genital cutting. This is the Dawoodi Bohra sect of Islam that practices this particular form of genital cutting on girls. They also circumcise boys as well.
So just as an aside, I assume that our audience has no idea what this sect is all about, how big it is. It's not all of Islam, right?
Right. Most Muslims do not practice female genital mutilation, but there is a significant minority of those who do. And of the 6 schools of jurisprudence inside of Islam, 2 of them do say that circumcision is required, both for males and females.
So that's potentially a third? Or you really can't think of it that way?
Yeah, I don't think you can think of it that way, and even in that case, it is not so common that this would be practiced even among those schools. It's just something that the clerics issue as fatwas, the interpretations or rulings that say this is what you should do, okay? But there's a great deal of division within Islam about female genital cutting. However, it is wrong to say that it is not part of Islam. It is in some sects, as in this case, very fundamental to the practice.
Even if it's not in the Quran itself?
Yeah, neither male circumcision nor female circumcision is in the Quran, but they are in the Hadith, and it is quite clear that Prophet Muhammad said that this is a recommended practice to do, this is a good deed, as he put it, to cut the girls, the genitals of the girls, but not to cut too much. We don't exactly know what that meant, but that there was some concern for the welfare of the girls, but that they understood, as we do today, that it was a moderating influence. The intent wasn't to take away all sexual pleasure. That may have come later, but the original intent was to moderate the desires of the women for sexual activity.
So approximately how big is this sect of Islam?
There's about a million Dawoodi Bohras worldwide. They're based in India. They have immigrated first to Africa and the United States, Australia. They have been very successful in the professions, medicine, science, engineering. The women are as well educated as the men are. They've done very well, and they have spread their practices and their mosques wherever they go. Right. They're very strong adherents. There is a subgroup within the Dawoodi Bohra who object to the practice and who say this should not continue, this particular tradition should not continue. Unfortunately, those people who are critical of the female cutting are not critical of the male cutting, the male circumcision. Okay,
okay, so male circumcision anyway. But, okay, so let's get back to the case at hand. I saw in the newspaper that there was an initial there was an initial hearing, and at one point the doctor said that there wasn't any cutting at all, that there was some sort of a scraping or a wiping or something. Could you expand on that?
Well, first there was a complete denial. So they lied to the FBI, they lied to the investigators, and they said, we didn't touch these girls. These girls had their genitals torn on the playground. They had some kind of accident, and that was their first denial. Then they went in front of the judge in a hearing and said, well, we wiped the genitals of these children. We wiped the mucus, is what it says in the transcript. And the judge was quite confused by that. I mean, why would you bring two girls from Minnesota to wipe the mucus? But what they were really saying is, we wiped the mucous membrane with a knife.
Right.
And that is the practice that they, the Dawoodi Bohra practice, which is called khatna. So khatna is from the root word of circumcision, whether it's male or female, it's khatna for the girl. And this is a cutting of the hood of the clitoris, which is known as the prepuce of the clitoris in the literature, or the foreskin of the clitoris. Males and females both have foreskin, and in the girls it's the foreskin of the clitoris, and the boys the foreskin of the glans penis, or the foreskin of the penis. Okay.
So we had this initial thing, but the case has actually moved on. There's been at least a partial ruling.
Right. You know, last summer, first there was a fight over the bond. There was a number of bond maneuvers and hearing that said, first the Judge Friedman, who is the federal district judge in the case, denied bond for all, and then he said, well, you put up $4.5 million. He set the bond for that. Yeah. So the Dr. Jamana Nagerwala and Dr. Attar were released, as well as the mothers, on tethers with a very restricted movement, and a great deal of collateral had to be put up. This money was raised by the community, by 17 members of the Dawoodi Bohra Mosque in Farmington Hills, raised the money so she could be out after 7 months of being incarcerated. She is now out on bond.
Yeah. So this is a federal crime. This isn't a misdemeanor. This is a federal offense that they've been charged with.
Right.
So this is real serious, and that's why the bond was so high.
Yeah, yes, this is unprecedented, and the judge said that. We've never tried a case like this. It's all new to everyone, and he had to rule on several of the charges. One of the charges was the trafficking charge, the sex trafficking, that is transporting minors for the purposes of sexual activity. So in December, there was a hearing that I sat in on to decide on the motion of whether this was actually sexual activity in cutting the girls for the purposes of sexual gratification or sex crime, or whether this was only a religious practice that was done with the best intentions for the girls. So the judge heard both from the prosecution and the defense, and in January he released his decision and said, no, this was not sexual activity. There was no gratification intended or received in doing this procedure, but all of the other charges have remained. That is, they are charged with female genital mutilation according to that statute that went into law in 1997. It's a 5-year felony. It says no part of a girl's genitals shall be cut for any reason, including religious, custom, or tradition.
Right. So it wasn't, this sex trafficking. It wasn't the girls were transported. That wasn't the real issue. I mean, the parents did that. That wasn't the doctors that did that. It's really the just narrowing down the letter of the law. What is it that we mean by this?
Right. But you know,
yeah, right.
Under the state laws, the parents are in the process of losing their custody rights, their parental rights.
Oh, really?
For endangering their children. Absolutely.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and they've been taken out of their homes.
I see. So are we up to date now on the current status of this case?
Well, it's set to go to trial in June. Of course, that can change.
Right.
It's going to be a jury trial. So first there'll be a jury selection, and both sides are going to want to select jurors that will be most favorable for their case.
Yeah. There is a quote, and I forget who said it, but somebody said, "Oh, I'm terribly afraid of jury trials. These are 12 people who failed to get off jury duty."
Yes. Yes.
I always thought that was a funny thing, but yeah.
But it's likely that they, if they're men, they've been circumcised. If they're mothers, they've decided on a circumcision perhaps for their son. So
Possibly, yeah.
this case, even though it is a case of 6 girls getting circumcised, getting the foreskin of their clitoris removed, it has wide implications for the practice of male circumcision in the United States.
I wonder idly, I wonder if they could even find 12 people who hadn't been circumcised or hadn't, have no. Atheism is actually on the rise, so you never know. Maybe you could. We're up to like 25% who self-identify as none of the above, no religious preference.
Right.
So
the defense of these doctors, they're going to try and connect male circumcision as close as possible to this practice of the duodi bora, removing the hood of the clitoris. They're going to say, this is just like male circumcision. So they circumcise boys, don't they? And they're going to ask for dismissal of the charges.
So it could, but that even could backfire. That could actually expand the mutilation issue to boys. I mean, potentially.
Right, because we have
at one extreme.
We have 500,000 girls in this country that have immigrated or are born of parents who have immigrated from countries that practice regularly the female genital mutilation. So this is an estimate. We don't know for sure, but we're not just talking about the 6 girls that were mutilated. Even for this Dr. Nagerwala, it's likely that over 100 girls were mutilated in her clinic. Not to mention all of the other girls that are at risk from private practitioners from some form of female genital cutting.
Okay. Okay, so religious issues. This case seems to just seems like there should be religious issues that should be raised by the case. So there's a lot of interest, and I'm sure some of it's religious. Could you?
Well, when people talk about religious freedom, they're often referring to their own religious freedom. They're often saying, I have the religious freedom to do this or to discriminate on this basis because it's my religion, or to pick this. In the case of circumcision, this is the only practice, religious practice, that involves cutting another person's body, and that person is a child, right? So
mostly a child. Yeah.
Cutting on a child, that's the nominal form, and it serves the purpose of moderating or reducing their sexual response. So it's a very unusual practice. For those in the Christian population, they may say, well, cutting the girls is ridiculous. We can't allow that even for religious reasons. It's not their religious practice. But they do practice male circumcision, if not for religious reasons. They practice it out of this myth that there's medical benefits. So they're going to have to choose between the two and check which box is ethical. If you indict these doctors and you convict them on charges of female genital mutilation, then what about all the boys who also have lost the foreskin of their genitals? How can you go on and pretend that this is completely different?
Right, especially since in both cases there's no consent, and in both cases it's about the same thing that we're talking about.
Yes.
Right. So, yeah. So, female circumcision in Islam, is that real common across Islam? Did we cover this?
It's not common across all of Islam. It's important to remember. But there's a lot of denial in the media that says that it doesn't have anything to do with Islam. And as I mentioned earlier, it does have something to do with Islam. It's just not widely practiced, but it is practiced. So, and they attribute that to Islam. Whether a different group would say, no, it's not part of Islam, it's not part of their expression of the Islamic tradition or their interpretation of the Islamic tradition. And so in every group we have this. Some groups will claim or cling to the tradition while others will either abandon it or not claim it for themselves.
Yeah. So just last on religious freedom, a lot of the religious freedom laws that have been passed, especially lately, they seem to be about one group being able to impose their will on other groups. So, for example, if the Christians don't, they don't allow female mutilation, right? If that's what their idea is, if they're imposing that on the Islamics, you know, this is a case that potentially brings religious freedom all by itself as a concept, at least as the modern concept, into question completely. So that sounds interesting all by itself. That's a different angle. So there's a lot of angles to this.
Right, and it's the religious freedom of the individual to choose for the individual what they wish to do, not what they want to impose or discriminate against someone else. So in this case of a child, they too have a religious freedom that's independent of their parents, right? So the parents can't just say, well, it's my religious freedom to cut the genitals because that's what my religion says, that's how I interpret it, that's what I do, and I want to do that to somebody else. You can't do that. This is unethical.
There is a problem in that you really can't reverse this surgery, not at least completely. It's not really something you can do.
No, but the state has an interest. That's what we're trying to say. The government has an interest in protecting children, in preserving their First Amendment rights to practice their religion as they see fit, and also to be secure in their person, right? Bodily autonomy and genital integrity. That is what we're trying to impart and educate when we talk about male circumcision. This is a violation of a child's body, as well as if it's done on a girl. It's a violation of their body and their right to choose for themselves as adults, as fully informed of what they wish to do.
So I understand that you have an upcoming courthouse protest in NOCIRC of Michigan?
Yeah, we'll be having a protest downtown on Lafayette Street, downtown Detroit.
Okay.
The trial is scheduled for Tuesday, June 5th, and we're going to be there. We're going to be educating the press who will be assembled, as well as people attending the trial, about the need to understand this in a greater context, that all children need to be protected from genital cutting.
So there'll be materials to pass out and things like that?
There'll be some materials, but there'll be lots of signs. The media has taken a great deal of attention about this case in particular. The defense has already cited male circumcision as one of their defense strategies, that they're going to say this is no worse than male circumcision. The prosecution is likely to try and divide it and say, no, this is different than male circumcision. We're going to remind them that it's very similar. The outcome of the case is education. No matter what happens, we're going to be reaching a greater number of people about the subject that they think they already know, which is male circumcision, and female genital mutilation, which they also think that they know, and few understand the various forms of this cutting that's done on girls. The cutting in this case is so similar to male circumcision that the case itself is going to be toxic, in my view, to the practice of male circumcision in the coming decades.
At least by education. I understand that there is a reduction in circumcision in the U.S.
Right. In the western states, it's down to 20%. Unfortunately, in Michigan, it's about 83% of newborns get circumcised.
That would be Kellogg's
perhaps John
your
Harry
breakfast cereal.
Kellogg and his promotion of circumcision in the 19th and the early 20th centuries.
That's right, yeah. So, likely outcomes from this case. We've got, there could be a range, and we've already described some of them, but...
Right. The defense team, the defense lawyers have added Alan Dershowitz as a consultant to the case, and he has already made public statements that male circumcision needs to be protected, and in the case of the Jewish tradition, if a convert to Judaism has already been circumcised, they get a pin that is penetrated the penis and draws blood, and that is the symbolic circumcision upon their conversion. That's how they make a non-kosher circumcision kosher, by drawing blood with a pin.
I understand that from the Bible, in the Old Testament, from the Christian Bible perspective, the Old Testament, they would conquer some people, they would convert them to Judaism, and circumcision was part of that. And these guys would be, they're adults, right? They'd be in horrendous pain, and they were crying and everything. Yeah. And one of those stories says that they slaughtered them.
Yeah.
Not very nice.
Yes, that is in the Bible.
But anyway, it's a painful thing. At least you would expect it to be painful to an adult, but it should be painful to children as well.
But there are Jews that are concerned about the outcome of this case. That's what I'm trying to impart. That if I can I can't circumcise the foreskin of my daughter, but I can circumcise the foreskin of my son. How does that really look? What fundamentally is different? There's people who say, well, there's health benefits to male circumcision, but there's no known health benefits to female circumcision. Of course, female circumcision is never practiced in the United States, so it was never really studied.
Sure,
Okay.
sure, not studied.
Right.
Yeah, and then studying is not just, oh, I saw this sort of thing going on. A real study has, you know, a control group, and you know, you'd have the circumcision group, and you'd follow them, you know, potentially for their whole lives. You'd do a lot of that kind of thing.
But there were some physicians in the early 20th century who were cutting the genitals of girls who were caught masturbating. If the parents brought in a girl and they said, look, she's touching herself all the time, I can't make her stop, he would either inflict some pain on her genitals to make it painful for her to masturbate, or to cut the clitoris from her so that she would stop masturbating. Some of these women are actually still alive.
As an adult, I had a biopsy at one point, and I found it exquisitely painful for like 3 or 4 weeks. It was anyway. My current opinion on elective surgery is elect no. You know, elective surgery, you know, you don't have to do it, right? I had my gallbladder out. I'm glad I did, because I would have died. No question about that. That was not elective. That was emergency surgery. They did a great job. But this biopsy, I didn't really need it. You know, it didn't answer any of the questions that I had. You know, that's what it was. It was an exploratory thing. And I would just as soon I didn't have it, but I don't know that, because I wouldn't have known that up front because I hadn't had it yet. But as an adult, I could make an as informed decision as I could. But since I was circumcised, I couldn't, you know, as a child, I couldn't, you know, I had no input.
So the defense of male circumcision, even among religious people, is that there's some health benefits, right? But this is not really true. There's a hypothetical, potential, and rare benefit that might occur. It is not a universal benefit. So if you have cancer, and we cut out the cancer, there's an immediate benefit. But if you have a circumcision, it's only hypothetical and speculative that you'll ever receive any benefit from having been circumcised. So it's important to note that. And in medicine, that's really not how we practice medicine on any other part of the body. We don't go cutting things off thinking that there could be potentially a medical benefit. We wait until there is a problem, and then we address it. Because as you mentioned, surgery is always painful, it's risky, there's scarring, there's deformity. That is all true with male circumcision.
Yeah, all of us, yeah. I had heard a lot of things about male circumcision when I was growing up, and I now consider all of them to be essentially untruth. And I get the impression that the people who are telling it to me should know better, and so it feels like a lie to me. I haven't, you know, just investigating all of these things, and it would make sense. You know, we evolved as animals. We had a foreskin for
65 million years.
65 million years, for a long time. And like, if it wasn't beneficial in some way, why would we still have them? That makes sense to me.
Especially on the organ of procreation.
Right. You would think that, you would think that if there was something wrong with your genitals, that that would fall from the gene pool instantly in some interesting way. There'd have to be some overriding benefit, and there doesn't seem to be.
No. Little can go wrong with the organ of procreation without the species dying out.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So is there more on this case that we want to go over?
Well, like I said, it's a landmark case. There's passions on all sides. The far right have also adopted the case as an example of why we should restrict the immigration of Muslims from countries because of this practice. They see it as a problem of immigration, even though Dr. Nagerwala was born and educated in the United States.
In the United States, great. Yeah, a lot of the examples turn out to be not examples of what they're talking about.
For the intactivists like me, the anti-circumcision people, the male the people against male circumcision, this is such an important case in bringing awareness of the fact that it's not just girls who are at risk and who are damaged by this, that boys too have to be protected. And we can't set this rule and say, well, a little cutting is okay, because in this case, a little cutting is not okay. That's what the federal government has already said. They have all the evidence, they have the physical evidence, the pictures, and the testimony of these girls, and they said, this is not okay. We're not going to cut the foreskin of girls routinely for whatever reason at all. We're just not going to do it. We're not going to allow that to happen. And they finally have mustered the will to prosecute this very first case.
Yeah, and it does sound, at least from that perspective, you know, we've got the law, and we've got a case where it has been broken. This is the thing to do. This is the next thing to do, is to prosecute. So it sounds like at least that portion of the case should go with the law. It's hard to imagine.
Right. So if a conviction occurs, which I think it will, they will appeal definitely, and they will cite the Constitution, and they say this is our religious freedom. We have a right to practice our religion on our children as we see fit, and the government should not interfere. So it could go all the way to Supreme Court. They're going to try to overturn the 1997 law itself.
Right, right. And no idea how likely or unlikely that might be.
Well, people have a visceral reaction when they hear that girls have been hurt in this way.
That's certainly in this country, yeah.
With male circumcision, they don't. So I don't think that will be successful, but in doing so, they are going to indict themselves. If they are so outraged over what happened to these girls and not outraged over the male circumcision, it's just utter hypocrisy and inconsistency.
It is, and they might still go with that, because the courts may or may not be able to you know, change how the law should be enforced.
Right.
Not completely, anyway.
I would say that. So it's more a matter of education that this case will bring, rather than a legal precedent.
Yeah, and education is what this show is about, and that's one of the reasons why we had you on. I think it's an interesting case. The NOCIRC cause, I think, is a highly laudable cause. It makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, rational and all of that sort of stuff. This has been Norm Cohen on Atheists Speak Up.